knowledge and in all discernment. He gives us 3 reasons for that. And these 3 reasons we need to keep before us. This is why it is so important that our love abounds in knowledge and discernment. He says that they would approve of things that are excellent. We'll look more at this at the end of our study. Number 2, that they would be sincere. That's a word that means pure, without admixture, genuine. That they would be sincere and without offense, without sin, without stumbling. And that they would be filled with the fruits of righteousness, the fruit of the Spirit, the outcome of a righteous life. And all of that is dependent upon our love abounding in knowledge and in all discernment. Now, there's no doubt about it. Our love needs to abound. You think about the importance of love in Colossians 3. In Colossians 3 and verse 14, Paul said, "But above all these things, put on love." Put it on like it's a garment. I want you to clothe yourself with love. Why? Paul said, it is the bond of perfection. That bond, what brings us together. Now, we think about a bond, we think about a relationship, but we're talking about what holds things together. A bond. You want to bond 2 pieces of metal together, you weld them together. You want to bond maybe some plastic together. You're going to use some type of an adhesive, and many times that adhesive is something that actually makes the 2 pieces of plastic melt together like you would when you're welding metal. That's a bond. That holds it together. And he said the bond of perfection, of completion, what really brings things together is love. In 1 Corinthians 13 and verse 8, love never fails. Now, he's not saying there that a person's love never grows cold, because it does. That's not what love never fails means, because there's too many marriages where love has failed. Their love has failed. What he's talking about in the context is the fact that some things are going to give way after that first century, these gifts of the Spirit. But love, it will never give way. It will never leave. Even hope is going to give way to what we see one day. But love, we're going to have that for eternity. This is that eternal characteristic. So he says in 1 Corinthians 13 and verse 13, "Now by faith, hope, love, these 3, but the greatest of these is love." But what I want us to realize is, he's telling us the proper love that is called for is not an ignorant love. What he's saying is that the love of Christ, the love that we're to develop, is a love where we know what we love and we know why. We know what we love and we know why. I've had many studies with couples prior to their getting married. They asked me to do their wedding. We're going to go through quite a few lessons, anywhere from 10 to 12 studies before I'll do that wedding. And one of the first things that I ask them is whether or not they love each other. And of course, they always just kind of look at each other and yes, and they just feel so giddy about it. And then I'll ask them in a very straight face, why? And it's amazing how many times it kind of stumps them, because being able to articulate that or put it into words. But the reason that I ask them that is because if you can't tell me why, and maybe you need a little bit of time to think about it, but something's wrong. Something's wrong. We need to know who we love, what we love, and we need to know why. It needs to abound in knowledge. You know, God says that we're to love Him with all of our heart, mind, and soul. Not an ignorant love. Our love is not blind. It's not merely a feeling. It's not merely an emotion. The problem is that the idea of love is being hijacked. It's being misused to accommodate every form of error and selfish worldliness. You'll hear people saying, well, I think all that matters today is love. If we understand love right, there might be a sense in which we could say that, but that's not the way that they're using the word love. The idea of love in the Bible is that love is going to produce an obedient life. When Jesus said in Matthew chapter 15, in verses 7 through 9, that in vain they worship me, teaching his doctrine, the commandments of men. He said right before that they honor him with their lips. They praise him. They say all the right things. He said, but their heart is far from me. That's an indicator. When a person is not, when they know the truth, but they're not willing to obey it, they can talk a mean story about love, but it's not real. So love is that's just a word that's being used, kind of hijacked, really what the real concept of love is. And this text is going to help us to understand the love that Christians are to have and the characteristics of that love. Biblical love is based upon knowledge, and it is discerning. I want you to look at just some applications of this in the little bit of time that we have left. And there's a host of applications. This could be an entire series. But I want to start out by looking at the idea that I mentioned earlier, this idea of romantic love. Dating and prior to getting married, young people falling in love and dating. There are plenty of young people here. You need to be thinking about what that really means, because you're going to hear a lot of people talk about the L word and have you said you loved him yet? Have they told you they love you? It's a word that's thrown around a lot. But I want to tell you, young people, all of us, that love in a romantic relationship must abound in knowledge and discernment. When we talk about discernment is defined as the ability to judge well. There are far too many people that have been swept away with a euphoric feeling. They're not judging very well. And unfortunately, that euphoria and that rushing in of all of these feelings too many times allows them to step into a realm of intimacy, physical, sexual intimacy, and that completely clouds everything, and discernment at that point is almost completely thrown out the window. We have to be able to judge well. Discernment is the ability to see the dangers, the ability to see a thing as it really is, to see through the facade and to see what is really there. And in that realm of dating, you have a window of opportunity to get to see that person's character. Not just what they put forward on social media, but who they really are, work ethic, how they treat other people, the respect or lack thereof for their parents, grandparents, older folks, other Christians, how they feel about little children. These are all things that come from discernment, but you've got to make sure that feeling that you have is not just something that you're trusting as, oh, that's love, and there's a whole lot of feeling, so there must be a whole lot of love. No, love needs to abound in knowledge. We get to know that person. We know about them. We see their interaction with their family. We understand the background. It's all about understanding the character and the honesty of that person's heart. Do you know there are a lot of ways that the word love is used in dating today? There is an empty idea of love that we see in Proverbs chapter 7. We read about the young man that was devoid of understanding. In Proverbs chapter 7, he encounters a woman in the middle of the night, and she invites him to come back to her house. And in verse 18, she says, "Come, let us take our fill of love until morning. Let us delight ourselves with love." She's misusing that word, but she knows exactly what she's doing. There's no love involved in that. That's lust. It is all an aspect of feeling, and especially of physical intimacy that she's looking at there. What young people have got to be able to see is that they need to have, it is great that you begin to experience what love is. But that love must abound in a knowledge. You must know and discern, first of all, the pitfalls and the dangers of dating. In Proverbs 7, as we were reading there in verse 18, going back to verse 7, it says, "I saw among the simple, I perceived among the youths, a young man devoid of understanding." That's discernment, of knowledge. He didn't have it. He didn't understand the dangers. He didn't understand the pitfalls that were out there. And as you read at the end of that chapter, when his life is destroyed, start in verse 21. Proverbs 7 and verse 21, it says, "With her enticing speech, she caused him to yield. With her flattering lips, she seduced him. See how the emotions, the pride, all of this is getting in the way of being able to see and judge well, to discern. So verse 22, immediately he went after her as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a fool to the correction of the stocks, till an arrow struck his liver. As a bird hastens to the snare, he did not know it would cost his life. Now therefore listen to me, my children. Pay attention to the words of my mouth. Do not let your heart turn aside to her ways. Do not stray into her paths, for she's cast down many wounded. Listen, and all who were slain by her were strong men. Verse 27, her house is the way to hell, descending to the chambers of death. A lot of people like that out there in the world, young people. And it's not just young women. There's young men like that too. They're going to take you down a path that you may never come back from. So you've got to be able to see the dangers and the pitfalls of this relationship of dating, because as far as having feelings for a person, you can have feelings for just about anybody. You really can. I know that ruins a lot of good songs and a lot of good stories. But feelings are just feelings. They have to be feelings that are based on facts are safe. But we've got to be able to see those facts. That's why you've got to be so careful in controlling those temptations and those dangers of going into that physical intimacy before you've had time to objectively see who this person is. And the Bible is filled with these warnings. There again in Proverbs, in the same area in chapter 5, he says, beginning in verse 1, my son, pay attention to my wisdom, lend your ear to my understanding, Proverbs 5, now verse 2, that you may preserve discretion, and your lips may keep knowledge. In regard to what? He says, for the lips of an immoral woman drip honey. Her mouth is smoother than oil, but in the end she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps lay hold of hell. Lest you ponder her path of life, her ways are unstable, you do not know them. He's saying you need to flee, you need to run, like Joseph did from Potiphar's wife. You need to understand that danger. Then in chapter 6, right after that, verse 23, the commandment is a lamp and the law a light. Reproofs of instruction are the way of life. Verse 24, to keep you from the evil woman, from the flattering tongue of the seductress. Do not lust after her beauty in your heart, nor let her allure you with her eyelids. In other words, these are all shallow. These mean nothing about the character. For by means of a harlot, a man is reduced to a crust of bread, and an adulteress preys on his precious life. You want your life destroyed? Everything upended? This is the fast track. Verse 27, can a man take fire to his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Love must abound in knowledge and all discernment. He goes on in chapter 9, verses 16 through 18, if you're taking notes. But this is why in Hebrews 13 and verse 4, the Hebrew writer, by inspiration, says, marriage is honorable among all and the bed undefiled. But fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Don't ruin your ability to fall in love with the right person. I'm not saying there's only one person out there in the world that you can fall in love with. But the right person is the person that's going to help you get to heaven. That's right. And there's more than one person that can help you get to heaven. Now, I know that may take away from some romance and some things like that. But you need to find that person that is going to be able to help you and your children get to heaven. You need to be looking for that character. In Ecclesiastes chapter 11, the wise man tells the young people, he says, rejoice, in Ecclesiastes 11 and verse 9, rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. He's saying, enjoy your youth. Then look at the end of that verse. But know that for all these, God will bring you into judgment. There's going to be an accountability. There's a consequence to every decision. So enjoy your youth. And you can enjoy youth and be righteous. As a matter of fact, that is going to make the memory sweet. The memory of the righteous is sweet. You can look back on those things and enjoy that. Some of these people that you date, you may be worshiping with later. You need to think about the long-term consequences of decisions and the way that you conduct yourself in that. He says, so therefore remove sorrow from your heart, put away evil from your flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. A lot of those things that happen there, they're short-lived. But what you need to focus on is putting away evil from your flesh, and then you can enjoy your youth. Romans chapter 13, there's some good advice that he gives here, though. In Romans chapter 13, he says in verse 13, Romans 13, and in verse 13, young people, I want you to highlight this, make a note of this, and especially verse 14. But he starts in verse 13, he says, let us walk properly, as in the day, not in revelry and drunkenness, not in lewdness and lust, not in strife and envy. Listen to verse 14. But put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to fulfill its lusts. In this dating relationship, you need to make sure that you are knowing and discerning the pitfalls of danger, and that you understand that there are some ways that you can make provision for lust, for the lust of the flesh. The way that you dress, or the way that the person you're dating is dressed. You can't afford that. The entertainment, the movies that you go and see, the things that you talk about, even the texting, and maybe the various things on social media, you have to be knowledgeable and discerning of the dangers in this area and make no provision for the flesh to fulfill its lust. You make sure that you have a commitment with the person you're dating, that you're not going to allow yourselves to be alone or in a compromising situation where temptation is going to roar. Stay away from that. 1 Peter chapter 2 says in verse 11, Beloved, I beg you as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts, which war against the soul. That word abstain means nothing to do with it. Abstinence. You don't even go near fleshly lusts that war against the soul. And there are a lot of those involved in a dating relationship. You've got to be careful. And this next point, discerning the other person's value. This is another important thing about dating. Dating is not a sport. It's not to see how many people you can go out with or if you can break their heart before they break yours. This is someone who hurts, someone whose identity is in a formidable place. As young people, there are so many parts of your life that are fragile. They're being formed right now. And you need to be able to understand the value of this person. Paul told Timothy this in 1 Timothy 5. He said in verse 1, Do not rebuke an older man, but exhort him as a father. Younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters with all purity. Understand the value. Understand the seriousness of the person that you're dating. You need to protect the purity of that other person. You may not care about your own purity, but you can never give that person's purity back to them. Understand how valuable that is, how valuable it is to them, and how valuable it is to their future husband, and how valuable it is to their children. Because you may not marry that person. And even if you do not want to put a sting or regret at the beginning of your relationship with that person. Understand their value. And in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 12, you know this golden rule that we talk about? Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law of the prophets. Remember that when you're dating. Don't treat this person in a way that you wouldn't want to be treated. You know, that, like I said, there's so much of relationships that go on now to where it's you know, well, I'm going to do this before they do this to me, or I'm going to make sure that I hurt them as bad as they hurt me. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Treat them with respect and with value. You want to be building a friendship with this person. That's how you're going to be able to see their character and know if they're the right person. And if you find out, you know what, this person's a great friend, but this would not work in a marriage. Great. You dodged a bullet. You both did. Move on. Maintain a good friendship. Hopefully it's going to be a brother or sister in Christ anyway. And you're going to be able to live the rest of your life with respect and appreciation for that person. This is knowledge and discernment. There's something beyond dating. You may not end up married to this person. And if you do, what you do before you get married is going to have a great deal to do with the success of that marriage after. Knowledge and discernment, with purity and with respect. But then following that, going into marriage, I want to speak specifically to husbands about their love for their wife. Yes, I understand in Titus chapter 2 that the women are to be taught to love their husband and love their children. And I need to add that to the sermon. I understand. But husbands, I want to talk about our responsibility to love our wife. Because that's exactly what the Lord commands us to do. You know, there's an empty love. That is, a husband who treats his wife with abuse and then says that he loves her. We see through that so clearly. A husband who neglects his wife for his selfish pursuit of his hobbies or his career or work or whatever it might be. That's not true love. True love is sacrificial. And the Lord commands husbands to love their wives as Christ loved the church in Ephesians chapter 5, beginning verse 22. We've got to make sure that that's not just something of rote that we say, but it is that in our relationship as a husband, as a father in the family, that our outlook is what is best for that family. My personal preferences come last. That doesn't mean that I'm going to relegate my authority as the head of that home, but that authority is not to be used to get what I want. And in order to gain the respect from your wife that you need so much to be successful, when your wife respects you, you can jump over the moon. You can accomplish amazing things. And she will train your children to respect you. And I want to tell you a key to that. When she and they see that you do not serve yourself, the leader-servant is the key. This is what Rehoboam was told by the older advisors that he asked. When he went to them for advice, they told him, if you will serve the people today, they'll serve you the rest of their life. He didn't listen to him. He listened to his younger friends. What those older men were telling him is the key to leadership and success. Servitude. That's what a great elder is. That's what any great leader is. So husbands must have this kind of sacrificial love. And the way that we do that is that our love for our wife would abound, yes, in knowledge and in all discernment. That means that we need, first of all, to know and to discern her value. In Proverbs 31, in verse 10, Lemuel's mother tells him, who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. I want to tell you that's an attribute in a wife, young men, that money cannot buy. Knowing that you can trust her with everything, whatever you work for, but even more valuable than that, the lives of your children, that you don't have to listen in, that you don't have to follow up, that you know based on her character that she is faithful, trustworthy. Her worth is far above rubies. Notice, he says in verse 12, she does him good and not evil all the days of her life. If you live long enough before you're married to see a man who cannot trust his wife with his finances or with her purity, I want to tell you that will stick with you forever. To be able to see the anguish and the pain and the insecurity of living a life with children by a woman that you cannot trust. Men, you need to be thanking and praising your wife in front of your children often for her purity, for her faithfulness as a godly woman, as a wife, as a mother. We need to make ourselves aware of the value of that, because that's not in every marriage. And we need to express that. Proverbs 18 and verse 22, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. That's a proverb. That doesn't mean everyone who's married gets that. He's talking about a man who finds a wife that is worthy. Genesis 2 and verse 18, God made the observation that it's not good that man should be alone. You know, sometimes we do not fully appreciate the value of companionship. And maybe that's because our wives, what they're geared toward and what they're really good at is nurturing relationships and communication. They do that through companionship and time. And maybe we're uncomfortable with it and we're not ready for as much as they are. And so if we're not careful, we begin to think that, boy, I'd like some time alone or I want to go on this trip. I want to tell you, that companionship is something you just ask a man who's lost his wife. There is nothing in the world that he would value more than to have that companionship back. It's something that is a trait that God understood the value of it. And not only to know and discern her value, but to praise her for it. You know, we saw in Proverbs 31, verses 10 through 12, how valuable the wife was, far above rubies. But I want you to notice her husband in verse 27. It says, she watches over the ways of her household. She does not eat the bread of idleness. She's a hard worker. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Why? Look at the rest of that. Her husband also. And he praises her. That's how our children are going to do that then. That just happened. They need to hear that from their dad. Their mom should not be the brunt of every joke. She should be praised and valued because she is different. Because she is so good at what she does. Better than anyone else at what she accomplishes. And your children need to hear that from you. That's a love that abounds in knowledge and discernment. And your boys will grow up to value that same thing, and they will find a godly mate like that. And your daughter will grow up to have security and a value for herself. And she will expect and thus find a man who will know her value and who will praise her for it. And you will live some good days. You will enjoy the rest of your life. But if you disrespect your wife, you fail to praise her, you will see your boys sometimes married to women that they cannot value. Or your daughter, who is insecure the rest of her life, and marries a man who does not praise or appreciate her. And you will regret all of those years that you failed to give that praise. He goes on and says in Proverbs 31 and in verse 30, charm is deceitful, beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Listen to verse 31. Give her of the fruit of her hands. This is to her husband. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. I'm going to tell you, when it comes to a godly wife, men, surely you know that there is no one in this world, there's no one in academia, there's no one in college, no one at school, no one in the career world that is going to praise her for what she does as a wife and a mother. And if she's going to get any praise, it's going to have to be homegrown. It's going to come from Christian men who train their children to value those things. Yes, that's the kind of love that needs to abound, to praise her for her value, and to know her. To know her. This love abounds in knowledge. We need to know our wife intellectually, to seek to understand what she cares about emotionally, spiritually, to study the Bible, to pray together, to know where she's weak and where she's strong, and what she can help you with spiritually. To know her intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually, and not just physically. That's what Peter is talking about by inspiration when he says in 1 Peter 3 and verse 7 that husbands are to dwell with their wives with understanding, knowledge, discernment, and value. And I know that we're running out of time, but let me make this point as well before we close. A parent's love for their children. Yes, there's an empty love there too. Parents that abuse or neglect their children. Parents that are selfish. There's so many parents today that their children are just something that they want to get down and show off at a sporting event, at a game, and then they want to put them up on a shelf. They want to farm them out somehow to some type of daycare or let someone else raise them, but they want to be there for their games and there for their sports or there for their academics or whatever it might be, their musical talents. I tell you, that's an empty love. That's not true love. No, parents, our love for our children needs to abound in knowledge and discernment, and that begins with knowing and discerning their value, just as a husband does for the wife. We need to know and discern the value of our children. The psalmist says in the 127th Psalm, in verses 3 through 5, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. Happy is the man who has his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but shall speak with their enemies in the gate. I want you to think about that. Children are a heritage from the Lord. He's telling us here about the value of children. And I want to tell you, parents, there is no greater investment that you will make in your life than the time and the teaching and the nurturing and the instruction, all of the training that you do with your children. That will pay dividends for the rest of your life and for generations to come. Far more than any financial investment that you will ever make. Truly, it is a heritage from the Lord. And notice the next part of that. He said, like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are children, the children of one's youth. I think about that idea of an arrow. I just mentioned to you that this year, Jennifer and I became empty nesters. Our children are out of the house. It doesn't mean that they're out of our hearts or our minds and that we're done, because I guess that goes on forever. I saw that with my parents. And then you have grandkids that you train and you're concerned about. But I truly understand how with children, we spend this time drawing them back with a bow and setting this trajectory. I've done some archery, some bow hunting, and I understand the idea of that trajectory with an arrow. And you aim at where you're trying to put that arrow. And with practice, with diligence, you can be pretty good with an arrow. I had a friend in New Mexico that I used to hunt with, and he would take a Nerf football and throw it up and take his bow and shoot it out of the sky. It was incredible. But that was through diligence and through effort and through practice. And I think about the trajectory that we want our children to be on, primarily spiritual. We want them to know the God of their fathers. Remember what David said to his son Solomon? To know the God of his father. We want our children to know, not just intellectually, but to truly, for it to be real. That's a trajectory. Our children aren't just going to go there through osmosis. It's not going to just be because they're sitting here in the church building. My children grew up with sound preaching. I want to tell you, it took a lot more than that. And there were times when I neglected what they needed. There were times when I was too busy with preaching and not spending enough time with them, solely with them, understanding what their challenges were, where their faith was strong, where it was weak. We cannot afford to fail to do that, because if we put them in that right trajectory, he's telling us that happy is the man. He will not be ashamed. Put them on that right trajectory. But also, we need to know the connection between love and discipline. In Proverbs 13 and verse 24, he who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. Do not forget that the discipline he's talking about, the training, that's what that word discipline means. The training that the Lord is talking about, this is the Lord speaking. This is inspired of God. It is from the Holy Spirit. He's talking about the training of the rod. And it amazes me how many parents think that they are the exception to the proverb. Oh, my child, it works better for them if I don't use a rod. That's not what I'm reading there. And I understand that proverbs are general truths. But I want to tell you that this is the truth. And it's not just here. Notice in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 5 through 11, He quotes an Old Testament passage. The Hebrew writer says in verse 5 of Hebrews 12 and verse 5, and you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as to sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, and scourges every son whom he receives. He's pretty specific, pretty explicit about the kind of training he's talking about. And do you see that he says that that is the product of a father who loves his child? Because every child needs some of that. Listen to what he says, verse 7. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? I can tell you a lot of sons whose fathers don't chasten them. But the point he's making is, what son is there that a father who loves him doesn't chasten? That needs to rest upon us. There's not enough fathers that are doing their due diligence in training their children. And we need to understand this whole thing about the rod and about chastening. It's not just punishment. Too many children have grown up in a home where they were only, the rod or the belt or the switch was only used out of anger or frustration. The parent just let it build and build until they just broke, and then they went crazy, and that kid says, oh, I don't like that. I'm not going to do that with my kids. Don't do that. Don't do that. This is not about punishment. It's about training. I want you to listen to what the proverb tells us in Proverbs chapter 23, or Proverbs 20 and verse 30. In Proverbs 20 and verse 30 it says, blows that hurt cleanse away evil, as do stripes the inner depths of the heart. Proverbs 23, verse 13, do not withhold correction from a child, for if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell. You know why? Because in Proverbs 22, verse 15, he said that the heart of the child, or that foolishness is bound up in the heart of the child, but the rod of correction will drive it far from him. No, when we start thinking that, oh yeah, I know that's generally true, but mine is an exception. Go back to Galatians 6. Do not be deceived. Do not be deceived. The reality is it's the hard thing to do. And in order for it to work, it has to be consistently done. Not out of anger, out of training, out of love. Consistently done. I want to tell you, brethren, this is not going to be taught anywhere else. This is a dying form of art in training children. And we are suffering an epidemic of disrespect, of rebellion, of lawlessness because families have given up on this kind of training, and God forbid that we're seeing more and more of those families in the church. You need to be going to the older members that have been successful in this kind of training. And if there are older members who say, oh, no, that didn't work, you need to go find someone else. Because God says that this is the connection between love and discipline. Because a parent that doesn't discipline doesn't love. Proverbs 13 and verse 24. Know this. And let me say this too. We need to know our children. That means I've got to spend time with them. I need to be having conversations with them. I need to be listening to what they're saying. I need to be able to create conversations, to be able to get them to talk about things. And many times they're going to say things when we are not ready for it, but we need to be listening. We need to have those conversations. We need to know our children and discern the value, know our children and be able to discern their areas of strength and build on their anchors. Because all of our children are going to be different. One child is going to be good at this and is going to be tender to this and maybe stubborn in this area. Another child's going to be stubborn in another area and tender in a different area. Some children aren't tender at all. I mean, they're all different. You know, they're like oranges and apples. They're all good. They're just different. And we've got to care enough to be able to deal individually with our children, to get to know them, to figure out what their strengths are and teach them, coach them how to build on those anchors. They're all going to be different. But that is love abounding in knowledge and in discernment. Well, I've already gone past the hour. Like I said, there's so many other things that we can look at. The idea of brotherly love and that empty love of just saying that, well, I'm going to pray for you. Love that doesn't act on it itself is not a true love. We need to know our brethren through hospitality and spending time together. We need to discern between matters of faith and matters of opinion. There are not enough brethren that do that. They want to bind everything. We need to love each other enough to know how to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And that love, though, does not overlook sin. Paul's prayer for you and I is that our love would abound in knowledge and all discernment. Why? So that we would approve of things that are excellent. There's no approving without first proving. We need to test all things and hold fast that which is good. That's knowledge. That's discernment. We need to be sincere without offense. That means we need to be genuine. And when love abounds in knowledge and discernment, that genuine faith and obedience is going to be there. And then we'll be filled with the fruits of righteousness. Well, I had to hurry through that last point. If you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to take some time with you. But you've already given me some extra time this evening. I appreciate it so much. We don't want to leave here this evening without extending the invitation of Jesus Christ, the one who has shown us the grandest love that has ever been known, to come and die on the cross for your sins and for mine. Would you obey the gospel this evening? Have you obeyed the gospel? You can come tonight believing in Him as the Christ, the Son of God, confessing your faith in Him, repenting of your sins, and being baptized in water for the remission of sins. We can assist you in doing that tonight. And if as a child of God, there's something you need to make right with Him, maybe it has to do with your love for your wife, your children, or for your brethren, or in some other way. Whatever it is that is between you and the Lord, whatever transgression, don't leave here without taking care of that tonight. And if we can assist you with that, please come forward and make that known. While we stand